Can you make an anime in 45 days? No. And hold up. I know, animators out there, you're like, yes, you absolutely can make animations in 45 days. And I would agree with you. Absolutely. That's why I'm going to have to explain myself. For this particular project, I was using frame by frame animation. So no matter how small the movement is, it was done on a new frame, drawn completely from scratch. Another aspect that I wanted to do was try to do as much of this as possible with painting and drawing. I didn't want to use CG. I don't want to use any sort of splined characters or splined assets like clip art. Every single thing in this was painted by hand, and every single thing in this was drawn by hand for the animation. The only thing that I do use are color grading and overlay filters for the different layers. I wanted someone to be able to watch what I made and not think, this is just an amateur YouTuber making it. I wanted them to look at it and be like, this is a professional animation. The reason this is a lofty goal for me to try to achieve is that I have no animation experience. This, right up here, is the only animation I've ever done in my life. Prior to this, I am an artist, though I would consider myself an intermediate at best, but mostly a beginner artist. I have done commission work for portraits and illustrations, though only a handful, over the last 5 years. And this was very useful trying to get into animation. I had most of the building blocks there. I just had to figure out how to make everything move. And when it came to actually animating the movement of things, I actually relied heavily on my past experience when I was a teenager doing Lego stop motion films. It was a very passionate hobby of mine when I was a teenager, and understanding how the easing in, easing out, and how the movement of frame by frame animations go, my animation experience with stop motion really translated well into figuring out how to do 2D drawn animation. But what did this all mean for my project? I had 45 days, I'm coming into this brand new, and I really wanted to make a complete short film. So I sat down and I created a story. I spent about 5 hours maybe working on a story, and then I storyboarded it again. I storyboarded it in probably 30 minutes. Probably should have spent longer at it. But the thing I wanted this to feel like, I wanted it to feel like a little snippet from a full-length feature film, not a start-to-end story of its own. So once I got the story figured out, it was on to the concept. Now, I didn't want to spend too much time on the concept. I whipped that out in the same day that I created the story, and a little bit on the next day. So around 2 days for the story and storyboards and illustrations for the concept work. Now, I was fairly familiar with the frame-by-frame animation as a concept. I've watched plenty of videos on YouTube, I've watched plenty of artists talking about it, and going into this, I knew that this would be a lot of work, but I was looking forward to it, and it was a lot of work. So the first rough layouts for the animation scenes was actually kind of fun. You know, you can just kind of whip it up, throw it in there, stick figures, you know, it's like little like weird misty balls. Weird misty orbs, you know, representing heads and stuff like that. Now, you had that stuff in there, and you know, you could move them around and you could adjust the frames. It was really fun. My favorite step in this whole process, though, was actually the next one, which was the keyframes. You could actually sit down and you draw an almost finalized frame that looks really nice, and you can kind of adjust it however you feel like, and you're like, yeah, that's my guy. That's my illustration that's coming to life. And that was really satisfying. Doing the in-betweens is where the time-consuming aspect came in for me. I was familiar with how in-betweening went, but drawing each individual frame in a way that matched the flow of movement was actually trickier than I imagined. Learning process. It took way longer just to figure these things out than, let's say, doing an animation where you already had experience doing this. What really helped me click with the whole easing in and easing out of certain movements was actually watching shows. I just watched anime shows that I really liked. The primary one that I watched while trying to make this was Samurai Champloo. And that really unlocked an understanding of sometimes you need small movements and sometimes you need large movements depending on the action, or in the case of a lot of stuff, no action. Though with that said, I still relied mostly on intuition. I tried to observe very closely my real life surroundings. I try to observe whenever I watch an animation that I really like. I just like to see how they're doing it. I try to understand it as I watch it. And taking that idea into this animation and trying to apply it to what I'm drawing is what I did. Now, to varying success, I will have to say, because sometimes I was able to visualize something that I was like, okay, this is going to move this far, this is going to move that far, and it's going to look great. And I'd do it, and it would look great, or at least to me, it would look great. And then other times I'd do it, and I'd be like, that is terrible, I am going to erase the project, I am going to go crawl into a ditch and die. Overall, being able to visualize how things are supposed to go and being able to visualize and understand in your mind's eye the way that objects work in a 3D world, and then being able to extrapolate the 3D object out of your memory and putting it into a 2D perspective. Now, that is probably what helps the most when it came to trying to get movements down. Now, as I was working on this, I jumped from scene to scene, and on playback, I can actually see very clearly scenes that I worked at the very beginning versus scenes that I did very end. It's a night and day difference between the beginning of the animation project versus the end of the animation project, and how realistically fluid and natural a lot of the movements felt. So most of the 45 days was actually spent trying to keyframe and do rough drafts for a lot of the work. So towards the end of the project, I could see that I was not going to finish this. I was way too ambitious with my project goals. Rather than having a minute, it was going to be like a minute 15, a minute 30, somewhere in that range. And I just wanted to have some finished stuff. So I started working on the coloring. Now, because of the style I'm using a rough pencil sketch line art style, which I think looks really good, really natural, and especially for something that is as dynamic and active as I wanted the film to be and present itself as. I think it really complemented what I was going for. But what that did mean was that coloring was a pain, because not only could I not use the color fill tool, because, pencil, you get all the like rough little edges and, it doesn't fill in the corners. I had to go through and manually paint in every single frame for any of the stuff I wanted to do. The toughest aspect of this entire project was actually the backgrounds. I'm a character artist. That's what I've done. That's what I do. I rarely do backgrounds except for a few illustrations here and there. But even that, it's usually just black and white pencil. So doing painting was a real new thing. I've never done it. Not really. So when I started doing the paintings, I really just needed to turn off my critical thinking and just be like, throw it up there. It'll look great. And yeah, that's what I did. Succeeded. Maybe a little bit. Though I did only get one finalized background done. Everything else was just placeholder until I could go back and actually paint a final background. It was really fun. Yeah, I really enjoyed this. And 45 days to do an animation is of this type. It is a long time and consuming process. Now, it's very rewarding, and I am going to keep doing it. I found where I like to do my art, and that's animation. So going forward, most of my art effort will be in animation. I am going to finish this anime, and I'm going to finish the short film. Because each of these steps takes a completely different time for me to finish, the overall project was about 50% done. Another 45 days of putting in 8-hour days, I would have been very, very, very close to having this done. So what is the takeaway from trying to do something like this? Well, go for it. I had a lot of fun. Honestly, best time of my life. I have never enjoyed doing something as much as this 45 days of animation. So if there's something you want to do that's ambitious and daunting, but you really, really want to do it, my suggestion, just go for it. You'll rarely regret trying something if you're giving it your all versus just not trying it at all. You'll regret not doing it way more than doing it and failing. So what is going to happen going forward with this project? Well, I'm going to finish it. It's just going to take me a lot longer. I'm working a job that has 12-hour shifts, and I'm gone most of the days of the week. So it's going to be very, very slow progress. Well, after 45 days, I can confidently say I'm going to continue forever. It just might be at a slower pace.